Financial Intermediary Taxation Act bills, we have the following resource persons. From the Department of Finance, we have Assistant Secretary Carlo Fermin S. Adriano and Attorney Nina Asuncion. From the National Tax and Research Center, we have Ms. Marlene A. Lucero Calubag and Ms. Monica G. Rempilio. From the Development Bank of the Philippines, we have Assistant Vice President Eileen A. and Attorney. From the Capital Market Development Council, we have Ms. Maria Gracia Casals Diaz. From Dubaladad and Associates, we have Attorney Benedicta Dubaladad. From the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, we have Attorney Eric R. Recalde. From the Tax Management Association of the Philippines Incorporated, we have Attorney Jacqueline U. Villar and Attorney Martin Ignacio Mijares. From the Bankers Association of the Philippines, we have Ms. Chona Reyes. From the Philippine Dealing and Exchange Corporation, we have Mr. Antonino A. Napil and Ms. Teresa B. Ravalo. From PEZA, we have Attorney Jenny Romero and Ms. Christy Cañete. That will be all, Your Honor.
Thank you, Committee Secretary. To be honest, we have uh, we have a lot of resource persons for this bill. We divided it into two, so we'll be conducting another hearing. Today, we invited the government agencies, the banking industry, some GOCCs who are affected by this bill. But later on in the second hearing, we'll be inviting some of the capital markets stakeholders, as well as the insurance industries and also GOCCs, because if you go through the bill, there are a lot of provisions there that would repeal some of the provisions of the different GOCCs, which are being governed by special law. So we'll invite them in the second hearing. So we'll have a in-depth and robust discussion today. We limited the number of participants so that we can have longer discussions. Today we'll be hearing 5 bills. The first one is Senate Bill number 900. And let me just read the title so that it will be reflected into the records. An act amending sections 22, 24, 25, 27, 28, 32, 34, 37, 38, 39, 42, 51, 52, 54, 56, 57, 73, 108, 121, 122, 123, 174, 176, 179, 181, 182, 183, 184, 185, 186, 187, 195, 198, and 199, repealing sections 175, 177, 178, 180, 188, 192, and 193 under Republic Act number 8424, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Pia Cayetano. Napakahaba po yung title, but the short abbreviation of this title is PIFITA. I think everyone is quite familiar with the acronym of PIFITA. PIFITA is short for Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation Act. So this is the description of that bill that I mentioned. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1347, authored by yours truly. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1364, authored by Senator Estrada. We're also tackling Senate Bill number 1848, otherwise known, introduced by Senator Tulfo. All of these Senate bills are virtually the same in terms of titles. And the House has already transmitted to us House Bill number 4339. And this is also a bill on PIFITA, except they included some other provisions in this bill, and we'll be discussing that later on. So we'll be tackling 5 bills, uh, 4 from the Senate, 1 transmitted from the House to the Senate. And just a short opening statement. I read the bill, I read PIFITA throughout, I read the entire bill, and there's 3 words that I would like to describe PIFITA. 3 words: no? Simplify, simplify, and simplify. No? Simplify in terms of understanding the taxation covering the financial industry. Simplify compliance from the point of view of our taxpayers, and simplify tax administration from the point of view of our revenue collecting agencies. So, 3 words that will enhance the experience in terms of administration, in terms of tax collecting, covering our financial institutions. However, this bill is not without challenges. I read the materials given to us by the Department of Finance, and later on we'll give the Department of Finance a chance to present this bill and also their findings, that there might be some adverse impact on terms of revenue collection, no? Because we'll be adjusting some of the rates covering the different passive incomes and also financial intermediaries, and there might be some negative impact in terms of revenue collection. And in my point of view, this negative impact might not be timely because we're still reeling and recovering from the effects of the pandemic. And one of the huge effects of the pandemic to our um, fiscal health is the increase in terms of public debt. During the pandemic, we actually increased public debt from 30% of our GDP to almost 60% of our GDP. We doubled it in the span of 2 or 3 years because we had to buy vaccines, we had to buy a lot of um, uh, um, PPEs and all the necessary equipment to fight COVID-19. And because of that, we had to borrow from different multilateral institutions, and our public debt doubled in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, After that, the Department of Finance legislated a medium-term um, fiscal framework that will manage our fiscal situation for the next few years, including how to reduce our public debt or how to outgrow our public debt in the next 4 to 5 years. By outgrowing a public debt, that means we need to be efficient in terms of tax collection, and as much as possible, we should not reduce our revenue take so that we can outgrow our public debt. But later on, throughout the discussion, we will hear the Department of Finance as to what is the revenue impact of this bill. Of course, there's pros and cons. There might be negative revenue impact on our on this proposal. However, the other side is we might be growing the financial sector, including insurance sector, including capital markets, and because of that growth, we will also collect more, and hopefully we can mitigate the negative revenue impact of this proposed measure. So later on we will discuss that, and I would like to hear also from our stakeholders how this proposed measure can grow your sector. It's also important that to understand from the experts' point of view on how this particular proposal can grow our capital markets, can grow our insurance markets, our insurance sector, um, and other components of our financial industry. It's important to know that because in the quest to mitigate the negative revenue impact, we also want to make sure that it's also contributing to the growth of our financial sector. So with that, as an opening statement, we'll go do the rounds as usual. We'll start off with our government agencies, particularly the Department of Finance, and then later on we'll hear some of the tax experts in our government, and then we'll do the rounds ending with our the financial sector and our experts from our financial sector. And feel free to interject later on if you have any questions regarding the presentation of our government agencies. So with that, we'll start off with the Department of Finance for their presentation. We'll start off with, who will present? Si Asa Carlo, are you present? Okay.
Good morning, to Senator Win. Good morning, everyone. I'm Assistant Secretary Carlo Fermin Adriano from the Department of Finance, and I will be presenting Package 4 of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. I would like to note that there may be some changes in the DOF proposal, given that we have a new secretary, and as mentioned by Senator Win Gatchalian, there's some revenue impact for the package 4, so there may be some changes, but probably, hopefully, minor changes. Next slide, please. So the goal of the reform is to redesign the financial sector taxation to be simpler, fairer, more efficient, and regionally more competitive. Next slide. Aside from this, the other goal is to make general tax compliance easier and taxation equitable to ensure progressivity, boost our tax effort, and increase tax trust. So this is consistent to what Senator Win Gatchalian mentioned earlier. Next. So this lists the reasons why we need to reform the passive income and financial intermediary tax system. So I will go one by one, discuss each problem, and we will discuss each solution for each problem. Thank you. Next slide, please. So first problem is that there are multiple tax rates and bases, make the tax structure very complicated, causing arbitrage and unfairness. So your rate will depend on your product, currency, maturity, issuer, taxpayer, residency, business status. Next slide, please. So our solution is to reduce the number of combination of tax rates and bases from 83 to 56. We'll provide more discussion of the details later. Next slide, please. So problem number 2 is that Philippines has among the highest passive income and tax rates in the region, reducing its competitiveness. Now, this figure shows you the tax on interest income is actually generally higher in the Philippines compared to the ASEAN average. As you can see here, yung Philippines, yung may black bar, tayo may pinamataas, and then the dotted green line is the average for the ASEAN. Next slide. Same story for royalty. We have one of the highest royalty in the ASEAN region. And again, the Philippines is the black bar, and then the dotted green line is the ASEAN average. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize and lower the tax rates. So from high to low. Next slide, please. Problem number 3 is that inequitable distribution of tax burden. Given the current system, the rich usually enjoys lower tax rate than the poor. An example of this is yung deposits. Usually, for short-term deposit, you're slapped with a 20%. However, for the long-term deposit, it can be as low as 0% or 5%. So basically it's kind of biased for the rich in the current system. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize and lower the tax rates on interest income. So what we're proposing is that there will be a gradual reduction, so from 20% down to 15% by 2028. Why is there gradual reduction? It's because of the revenue impact, to soften the blow of the revenue losses. Next slide, please. So same with royalties. So from 20% down to 15%. Next slide. And then for the capital, for the dividends, we will increase it from 10 to 15%. So basically all the passive income will be at 15%. Next slide. Problem number 4 is the shallow equity and debt capital market. Now this figure shows you the broad money as a percent of GDP is among the lowest in the region. As you can see here, yung Philippines as of 2020, it's at 90 billion. Compare that to Malaysia and Thailand. They have 53% more and 42% more compared to Philippines. Next slide. Similar story for this graph. This graph shows you the market capitalization of listed domestic companies as of May 2023 in billion USD. And as you can see in the ASEAN region, yung naka-box, we're second to the lowest, just slightly above Vietnam. Next slide, please. So our solution is again to lower the tax rate on passive income and harmonize the tax treatment between equity and debt. So we're also proposing that the sales of shares of stock of domestic corporation in foreign stock exchange instead of a 15% capital gain stock, we will now slap it with a stock transaction tax. And for the stock transaction tax, we're actually decreasing it to 0.1% by 2028. This will allow companies to expand sources of capital and to increase their liquidity. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, we will equate the DST for debt and equity. Currently, the current system mas mataas yung sa equity at 1% compared to the debt at 0.75%. So we'll equate the two at 0.75%. Next slide, please. Fifth problem is the uneven playing field among financial institutions. It gives advantage to certain sectors. So non-lending income of banks and quasi-banks are subject to 7%, but other FIs are subject to 5%. And then some are slapped with 1%. Next slide, please. So our solution is to equalize the tax treatment for all financial intermediaries. So our proposal is, instead of having 1%, 5%, and 7%, it will now be 5% gross receipt tax for banks and quasi-banks. Next slide, please. The sixth problem is the unequal treatment for insurance products with similar nature, which gives advantage to certain sectors. So life insurance premium is subject to 2% premium tax, but pre-need contribution is subject to 12% VAT. And life insurance levied graduated and fixed DST with 200 as maximum, but non-life insurance is levied with a 12.5% DST. Next slide, please. So our solution is to harmonize the rates for life and health insurance and non-life insurance. So again, instead of having a 2% premium tax and a 12% VAT, we will harmonize it. All will now be slapped with a 2% premium tax. Now, why is it a premium tax instead of VAT 12%? Because premium tax is more appropriate, given that this is more of an investment rather than consumption. Next slide, please. Problem number 7 is the high friction costs due to DST or documentary stamp tax. So summary of the issues. Not all DST rates are expressed in ad valorem. Second, DST on debt and equity instrument vary, which I've already discussed earlier that we will equate it. Number 3, non-life insurance products have high and varying DST rates. Fourth, fees on domestic money transfers are subject to DST. And fifth, there are multiple DST with low revenue take. Next slide, please. So our solution is to generally harmonize and rationalize or lower the rates on DST. So first one, we will express all DST rates in ad valorem, in percent. Second, again, this was mentioned earlier, we will equate DST on debt and equity. So both will be at 0.75%. And then we will also unify all non-life insurance rates and lower them gradually. So from the current 12.5 and 7.5%, we will harmonize everything and gradually lower it at 7.5%. And then fourth, we will remove DST on domestic money transfer to support financial inclusion. Current system is at 0.3%, so we will reduce it to 0%. And then remove provisions with lower revenue take, like in proxies and powers of attorney. Next slide, please. Eighth problem is the high administrative and compliance costs. Given the various rates, so it's prone to tax calculation error, and there's an opportunity for tax avoidance and evasion. So The solution is, next slide please. So reduce administrative and compliance costs by simplifying tax policy. So that's why we're harmonizing as much as possible the rates so that it will be easier for tax compliance and tax administration, and it will also lessen the opportunity for tax arbitrage and evasion. Next slide, please. So the ninth problem is the narrow tax base due to many exemption and special rates. There are 48 laws outside the NRC on passive income. And the solution is, next slide please, we will repeal 35 laws, but lower rates will mitigate the tax burden. So of the 35 laws to be repealed, 16 are true repeals and 19 are housekeeping, cleaning up repeals. Next slide please. And then aside from those 9 proposals, we have some enhancements on the package 4. The first one is the removal of pickups from the exemption of excise tax on automobiles. Now, pickup trucks were granted special tax treatment under the train law for their utility as workhorses for small business owners and professionals in their livelihood. However, the DTI observed that manufacturers modify pickup trucks to serve as passenger, leisure, or sports utility vehicles. So we're proposing to actually remove their exemption from excise tax. This will remove the inequity and counter adverse impact of such exemption in the automobile industry, and it will further support our carbon reduction goals in our commitments to the Paris Agreement. Next slide. This is just a summary of the tax administration reform to close the gap. So I just want to point out here the number 6 item, which is the adoption of automatic exchange of information. This is also included in the House bill version. Next slide, please. So we will show you the revenue impact of the DOF proposal. Next slide. So this is as of January 19, 2024. So assuming that the package 4 will be implemented by Q3 2024, this is the breakdown. So we have tax on passive income, tax on financial intermediaries, tax on transaction, excise tax on pickups, and then we're proposing prospectivity as well. So it will only cover new transactions or contracts. So as you can see here, so from Q3 2024 to 2029, total revenue losses is at 126 billion. So that means an annual average of around negative 21 billion. However, I want to note that we did not include any assumption on behavioral changes, given that this is basically reducing the rates. So you would expect more volume of transaction. Unfortunately, we're still in the process of inputting that changes in behavior in our computation. So in the slide here, that 126 billion does not include any behavioral changes. Next slide. That ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asek Carlo. I think well, everyone, I'm sure everyone welcomes the harmonization, some lowering down the rates, making it, like I said earlier, making it simple for compliance and also administration, and also for understanding. A lot of our taxpayers, especially the small investors, they get confused, no? When it comes to computing DSTs, computing tax rates. It's really confusing, no? So because of that confusion, a lot of our retail investors, especially common investors, are hesitant in investing into the capital markets, into insurance, because plain and simple, they don't understand, no, what they are paying, no? So we welcome that, and we're very happy that there's this effort to simplify everything. However, I'm quite concerned with the revenue impact, no? And like I said, no, the context here is we're just getting out of the pandemic. We might not feel the health effects of the pandemic, but we can feel the fiscal effects of the pandemic because our debt is very high, no? wala nang may sakit, wala nang may COVID, pero lahat tayo nagbabayad pa rin ng utang na kinontract natin during COVID time. So, no, they always say taxes, proposals on taxation is a timing, more or less, it's a timing issue. So I'm looking at whether this is a good time to reduce revenues or not. But what is missing in that presentation is also what you disclose, no, behavioral changes. No, I truly believe that all of this harmonization, all of this reduction, will translate into change in behavior, especially growth in different sectors. No? For example, the pre-need sector. No? Because we will reduce it from 12% to 2%, I'm sure there is some positive impact on that. No? And we'll ask our friends from the industry to share with us. But what I want the DOF to start coming up with is a simulation on behavioral changes. I know it's very difficult, no? Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but let's use our best educated simulations, or best guesstimate for that matter, to come up with different scenarios. This is just plain and simple, no, revenue reduction. Can we flash that slide? Yung revenue estimates. Iba ito dun sa binigay nyo sa akin eh. Ano? I have a different... can we flash that slide?
Di ba?
The last slide. Revenue estimates
Ganda
of
rin
the...
ito.
So what we're saying, over the last... in the next
Okay,
5
tuloy.
years...
Ay, nako. Yung some provisions, palitan natin. Pero yung Constitution mismo, maganda
we
ito.
will stand to lose
Nothing is
125.
absolutely wrong
Tama?
with the Constitution right now.
No, ASEC will stand to lose
Now,
125
maghanap
billion
kayo
in
ng
terms
wrong,
of revenue.
manggaling sa inyo yan.
Yes, Senator.
And
Magkagulo
that is
lang ang
why
bayan.
we, even though it's not passive
Hindi katanggap-tanggap,
income,
alam
pickups,
ninyo.
obviously it's not passive
Hindi lang
income.
ako.
There's a move
Ako
to,
retired na, wala na
to
ako.
remove the exemption for pickups so that it will
Ano na ako.
help soften the
Piece of paper na lang ako.
negative impact
Pero ang
of
sinasabi
this
ko lang
proposal.
yung
And we'll talk
wisdom,
about that
pati
later
yung
on because
gusto ng tao.
I remember when we were discussing
Huwag ninyong ipilit yan.
I think this is
Kasi kung
under
ipilit
case
ninyo,
itong,
mapipilitan rin ako magsalita
itong
in
pickup.
public.
I remember when we were discussing the exemption of pickup. The argument there is because pickups are
Ano
being
daw?
used by every sector. People in the agricultural sector use this to transport their goods.
Kasi kung ipilit ninyo, mapipilitan rin ako magsalita in public.
To inspect
Gusto
their
ng tao.
fields. And as a support
Huwag
of the agri
ninyong
sector, we
ipilit yan.
exempted the pickups. No?
Kasi kung ipilit ninyo,
But now we're saying
mapipilitan
that
rin ako magsalita in
pickups are
public.
not being used in the agri sector. They're actually being converted.
Ano ba yan? Banta ba yan?
And being used for passenger purposes. No? So we'll
Ate Cherry Saki, magandang umaga sa'yo. Ay, Ate Mocha! I miss you.
As a politician, once you give, it's hard to take back.
Tapos na sa kabila, Ate Mocha.
And let's justify it very clearly. So we want to see the justification on that.
Wag nyo raw
that,
ipilit.
argument.
Kayo mga tambaluslus
Pickups are
dyan.
being used
Huwag nyo lang
or primarily
ipilit yan.
not being-
Dahil
or
yan, pag
majority
pinilit
is not being
ninyo,
used in the agri sector. It's being used for other purposes. So we need to demonstrate that
sabi ng
clearly in
butiki.
this, hearing. And at the same time,
Yan ha, huwag nyong ipilit. Promise. Ay, Aki, magandang umaga sa'yo, Aki, ha? Nako. Huwag niyong ipilit, maniwala kayo.
That will, in effect,
Gusto ng tao.
institutionalize
Huwag
the
ninyong
implementation
ipilit yan.
of the medium-term fiscal framework.
Kasi kung ipilit ninyo,
that's the
mapipilitan
Bible
rin
now,
ako magsalita in
especially on
public.
how to reduce debt and outgrow debt. So we need to understand how this will impact that medium-term fiscal framework. Not today, no? Ready na ba kayo with that?
And nabuhay po ulit yung pagiging
Sir, we
patriotic
have
ng
those
mga
numbers,
Pilipino
but we
nung nakikita po
didn't
nila na
sir.
active
Okay,
kayo
sir.
ulit sa
In
politika
the
in
next
terms of
presentation, in the next
pagkokomentaryo.
hearing, present to us.
Meron po ba kayong
Will this negative 1
gustong
to
sabihin
5
sa mga
have an effect in
mga
our
Pilipino na
medium-term
talaga namang
fiscal framework?
sumusuporta sa inyo?
Kung wala
Ako
naman, then
ho'y
let's demonstrate. And kung
kontento
meron,
na.
then how do we mitigate?
Ako ho'y
Because we're all concerned. One of the
komportable
core
na. Ako ho'y
direction
maligaya
of
na
the
sa binigay
fiscal
ninyo
framework is to reduce debt, to go
na
back to our
panahon na
original
ako maging
30%
presidente.
to GDP
Tama ho yan
prior
para
to
sa akin.
pre-pandemic levels. No? So how do we
Wala na
reach
akong
that?
mahingi pa
There's
sa tao.
there's a very nice
Ayaw ko na.
presentation there.
Ayaw ko na.
But that's
Pagod na.
not taking into
Pagod.
consideration
May mga
PBBM.
anak ako na
So
mga
we need
politiko.
to
So,
understand how that will play a role in
hinayaan ko na lang
medium-term
sila
fiscal
sa
framework.
buhay
So,
nila. Pero ako personally,
and we
ayaw
want to
ko
see
na.
that later on. No?
But
I have a
sabi
lot
ko
of
nga,
questions
yung,
actually, but I'll
I would
reserve
connect
that so
it
that
with
we can all hear our colleagues,
previous
our resource persons. And,
question.
it's very important
That a possibility
get the,
might arise that I might
opinion of our
run for
resource
senator.
persons, especially on the presentation
I said
of DOF.
it
And then
must
I'll go
be
back to
a
DOF
compelling
with my
reason,
questions
not
later on. But
just
those are the
it
initial things
pang
that I
politika.
want DOF to
Kung
start
politika pang
running the
sweldo,
figures.
okay na ako sa
So, with
retirement
that,
ko.
we'll call
Kakain
on
ako 3 beses
NTRC.
isang araw.
Si Ms.
I do
Marlene,
not
who's been
need the
a
money.
very generous resource persons of this committee. So, Ms. Marlene, any comments on PIFITA?
Well, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. The National Tax Research Center, as we know, has been fully supportive of the passage of Package 4. It has long been in the legislative pipeline since 17th Congress, and it's already ripe for passage to help the government achieve the much-needed tax reforms in the capital market and financial sector. Well, it's worth highlighting
Well, there is the
that
possibility
Package 4
na,
was
na,
not
na
primarily
gagamitin na
designed
naman
to
nila
generate
itong
revenue
issue na ito.
for the government.
Di ba para
to
tirahin na
the
naman,
tax
ibato na
system,
naman sa
or as
kasalukuyang
you mentioned,
administration. Kasi wala na, lahat na lang ng
simplify the
issue, puro na
taxation
debunk na eh, di ba?
on
Yung
passive income,
pulburon,
financial intermediaries,
yung
and
pasay na,
financial
di ba?
transactions.
Ano, kumbaga,
To
pilay
achieve
na
these
yung pulburon.
objectives, of
Tapos,
course, there's
ano
the
pa
need
ba,
to
yung mga
reduce or repeal certain
tungkol sa
taxes
issue
in
ng mga
order to
retarded,
directly
di ba?
benefit the majority
Pilay na
of
rin.
the
No, ano pa ang
targeted,
issue? So,
the poor.
every time
But
na
in the
meron
long
silang
term,
masisilip,
would create
sisilipin
additional
talaga
revenue
nila.
stream for the government.
No? Pero, doon sa tanong
What we
natin,
wish to
kung may
achieve in
pagkukulang, may
Package 4
pagkakamali
is
ang
better
PCSO,
financial
meron
structure
talaga.
that will set
Dahil
the
first time
vision
na
for more
naglabas sila ng
efficient and
litrato, ng
diversified
pagkakakilala
financial
nung ano,
system
nung,
that will support
nung nanalo,
economic
which is hindi naman
development.
nila dating ginagawa.
Given this, it is our
Right.
prayer
Yeah.
that Package 4 will soon be passed by this August body. As to the revenue impact, Your Honor,
Okay.
when we computed for that, we excluded 2020 data as it is during the pandemic. And we constantly update our data because of incoming new data from the BIR. So that's why there might be differences in the figures. And we take note of having this aligned to the MTFF, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marlene. And you made a very good point. No? I remember, and I think some of our colleagues will remember this, during the discussion of, during the last administration, no? The Duterte administration, there was a huge aspiration to reform our tax system. No? And there were several packages. No?
Nagpaabot ng pasasalamat si Vice President Sara Duterte kay Senator Amy Marcos. Sa isang pahayag, sinabi ni Vice President Duterte na siya ay nagpapasalamat sa senador sa suportang ipinakita nito sa kanya, sa kanyang pamilya, sa mga Dabueño at sa buong Davao City. Sinabi pa ni Vice President Duterte na prinsipyo lang ang meron silang pamilya Duterte at tanging maipagmamalaki nila ay ang kanilang isang salita para sa kapakanan ng bayan. Matatandaan na sa panayam ng Laban Kasama ang Bayan kay Senator Marcos kamakailan, sinabi ng senador na dinipensahan niya ang mag-amang Duterte laban kay House
to return to pre-pandemic fiscal health. No? So that was the direction that the Senate undertook when we enacted that law. No?
Can I comment,
Yes,
sir?
yes.
Precisely under Package 4, we took note of the pandemic. That's why there is a shift in the taxation of pre-need plans HMOs from 12% VAT to 2% premium tax to make these products affordable to the masses, and also the reduction of the ST on non-life insurance from 12.5 to 7.5 to increase insurance penetration in the country and encourage Filipinos to insure their properties to minimize their risks when a contingent event occurs. So that's because of the pandemic. That's why we are trying to shift to the 2% premium tax.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Marlene. Ms. Marlene, I have some questions, no, and um, I hope NTRC can help us. One of the selling points of this bill is to make our country competitive, no, in terms of the financial sector or the financial industry, whether it's capital markets, the stock market. Earlier, the OF presented rates on interest income, rates on royalties. Do we have a study, comparing ourselves to the ASEAN and then to the rest of the world in terms of what is being covered here in PIFITA? So we will know. No? Earlier, that the OF presented that we're one of the highest in terms of interest income. Can we flash that slide? And then when it comes to royalties, we're also one of the highest. But there are also some other components of PIFITA. No? For example, insurance industry, capital markets. Do we have that study on where are we in terms of competitiveness? And how are we addressing that on this proposed measure?
What we have, Your Honor, is the comparative taxation in the ASEAN for certain available taxes under P4. And we can submit that, Your Honor.
Do we have that? Do you have that now, or is it still raw data?
What was presented by Yusek Adriano.
No. But do we
is
have,
the
let's
one
say, for
available.
meron lang kasi dito is interest income and royalties. For example, do we have part of the reform is, for example, equity markets, equity and debt markets. Do we have comparative analysis between ito yung pinakita kanina. But PIFITA has many components, no? Equity and debt markets, insurance market, including pre-need and the traditional insurance products. Do we have comparative analysis?
Not yet at this time, Your Honor.
Yeah,
but,
we'll request
we
from-
hope we'll have it.
Yeah, we'll
in the
request
next
from
meeting.
NTRC and DOF that analysis also. Let's compare ourselves. No? Where are we in terms of competitiveness in the financial sector in ASEAN and probably select countries around the world? And then how are we addressing that in PIFITA? Because the hope here is we get some financial inflows, for example, from other countries like Thailand or Singapore. You know, hopefully, with the adjustments that are being proposed, we can attract foreign funds coming from other countries. No? So that's also part of the direction. No? So we'll have that. If you can present that later on na rin, no? In the second hearing. Will anything else, Ms. Marlene?
No more at this point, Your Honor.
Yeah. We'll call on the Bureau of Treasury. Any comments on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on the part of the Bureau of the Treasury, aside from what was mentioned before regarding the revenue impact, what is important for us to appreciate here is that improving our competitiveness in the region would also improve the performance of our bond auctions. This will allow us to lower the borrowing costs for our debt by infusing liquidity into our domestic government securities. Currently, Mr. Chair, as of December, I believe the non-resident participation in our bonds is very minimal at 2.2%. Compare this to other countries in the region, which I think, for example, Indonesia would be above 20%. Of course, this is a two-edged sword, Mr. Chair. Increasing participation will improve, again, investments in our government securities, but beyond a certain threshold, this can also increase volatility in our financial markets. But given, again, once again, the very minimal exposure that we currently have any improvement in the foreign participation or non-resident participation will, we believe, greatly improve the performance of our bonds, Mr. Chair. So hence, the Treasury fully supports the initiative of PIFITA, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mariano. Ang layo, 2% versus 20%
Yes, Mr.
non-resident
Chair.
participation. And based on your experience, how come the non-resident participation is very low compared to, let's say, Indonesia, who's a neighbor of ours, similar demographics? How come it's they're getting 20% non-resident and us only 2%?
Mr. Chair, it's purely on the friction cost, Mr. Chair, caused by the high tax rate. Currently, we impose a 20% tax on interest income, but for non-resident, particularly for corporations, this can even increase up to 30%, Mr. Chair, under our current laws. That's why, again, this is keeping back some of the investors because comparatively, they would be getting less from their investment in our domestic bonds. But note that our external issuances, our foreign debt, Mr. Chair, is already tax exempt. So this initiative will move us closer to the at least a comparable rate with our peers.
Do you know how much Indonesia is charging? So that we'll have an idea and we can put that on record.
Currently, Mr. Chair, we can include that perhaps in our...
Medyo matagal-tagal na rin tayong last
just
na
share with us
nag-usap,
your,
Atty. At
that's a very
I
important
think
piece of
yung
information,
update na pinag-usapan
comparing
natin nung
ourselves
last time
to,
yung kagagaling nyo ng
our
Amerika.
our
So
neighbors.
ngayon,
So,
ano
can
nang
you
balita,
submit to us,
Atty. Doon
not
sa
only with Indonesia, but with other
Comelec na yan?
neighbors based on your experience on
Well, actually, ang napag-usapan namin ni Mel Magdamo, si Attorney Mel Magdamo ay isa po siyang mapagkatiwalaan po nating kasama. He used to work sa Commission on Elections. And actually, itong Miro, dumaan na to sa kanya dati kasi siya yung technical working group chairman dati noong 2009 na bidding. Sumali kasi itong Miro, itong nanalo ngayon. Pero natanggal po umalis, hindi siya natanggal. Umalis po si Attorney Melchor Magdamo sa Commission on Elections noong matapos niyang pinulkar yung folders camp. Di ba, bumili kasi ang Comelec ng 1.8 million pieces ng folder. Yung ballot secrecy folder, kung matatandaan nyo, papunta nyo sa presinto. Di ba may folder sa harap ninyo? At doon ka magtatago doon para hindi makita yung boto mo. Kasi nga,
1.8
hindi dapat makita, hindi dapat makita yung boto mo. Yung ballot secrecy. So, kaya tawag yung ballot secrecy folder. So, actually, plain folder lang po yun. Plain folder lang po yun. Tapos, printahan lang po na logo ng Comelec. Alam naman natin yung folder, tax 10 piso lang yan. Okay? 10 piso lang yan dapat. Mahigit, sige, sabihin nila 20 pesos na. Pero at that time, 10 piso lang yan. O, 10 piso. 1.8 million pieces. So, dapat, hindi lalagpas sa 20 million pesos ang contract price. Ang problema, overpriced masyado kasi pinalabas nila na halos 300.
Thank you, Attorney.
May nakasuhan na po tayo doon, sir. Yung initial na naunang apat na
But I'm very interested also
nahuli po on site ay nakasuhan na po yun ng murder at violation po ng 10591 o illegal possession of firearms. And
so just submit to us
dun sa sumunod po na operation kung saan may nahuli pa po tayong anim, may kinasuhan na rin po sila ng murder po.
Apat na lalaking sakay ng puting Fortuner na ito ang inaresto ng mga pulis. Sila ang itinuturo sa larin sa pamamaril kay Mayor Lester Sinsuwat ng Dato-Udin Sinsuwat, Maguindanao noong January 2. Sa naturang pamamaril, napatay ang police security aide nito. Ang insidente ay nangyari habang isinasagawa ang dialogo kaugnay sa away ng dalawang pamilya o region sa lugar.
Sa ngayon, sir, ongoing investigation kung sino po ba yung mastermind dito at i-clear lang
will impact decision making points of existing locators.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, when we talk to them, we already tell them about the incentives, and one of which is this one. So it might be difficult to explain to them how come we are again removing this incentive from them.
How come the locators are currently exempt from branch profit remittance tax right now?
We will check on that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, just include that in your position paper.
Yes, sir.
na rin, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So we've exhausted all of our government agencies. We'll go to our stakeholders. We'll start off with Attorney Baladad. Ma'am, I understand you have a presentation also.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, colleagues. I requested to do a presentation, Mr. Chair, because this is a very important legislation to us, especially in deepening our capital markets. Our Capital Market Development Council has been working on this for decades, and we are happy now that at least it's moving. So while I am no longer the co-chair of the Capital Markets Council, I am still one with them in advocating to deepen the country's shallow capital market. So the first question in evaluating the bill 4339 that we have in our minds is that will it deepen the country's shallow capital market? Will it allow capital market to develop as efficiently as possible with the least intervention? And here is the latest that we got, is data as of end 2021 of, can I have the next slide, please?
Alam ko na may tampo sa akin. Sinabi ko, paano? Sinabi ko naman ng loud and clear na hindi na tama ang ginagawa ninyo kay VP Sara at kay Presidente Duterte. Hindi tama yun. Hindi naman nakikipag-away. Sinasabing napakatapang ng mga Duterte. Matapang nga, bait-bait sa atin. Wala namang ginawa kundi tumulong. Nakipag-alyado, kaya nakabalik. Ano pang gusto mo? Ba't natin inaaway ang hindi nakikipag-away?
Correct.
Nagalit sa akin. Bakit daw ganon? Mas Duterte pa daw ako kesa sa Marcos. Sa loob-loob ko, hindi ka naman Marcos tuloy. Alam ko na may tampo sa akin. Sinabi ko, paano? Sinabi ko naman ng loud and clear na hindi na tama ang ginagawa ninyo kay VP Sara at kay Presidente Duterte.
Comsec, do you need the USB? Baka the USB is faster. I think you're streaming from...
Alam ko na may tampo sa akin. Sinabi ko, paano? Sinabi ko naman ng loud and clear na hindi na tama ang ginagawa ninyo kay VP Sara at kay Presidente Duterte.
There, okay. Comsec, do you need the USB? Baka the USB is
This
faster.
slide actually shows our standing, Mr. Chair,